Hi everyone, welcome to CI Diaries.
Sponsored by Wayside Publishing. My name is Carrie Toad.
And I'm Kristy Placido. Welcome to episode 7.
Today we're continuing our 3-part series called Robust Reading.
So part 1 of the Robust Reading series was all about pre-teaching vocabulary and structures, otherwise known as establishing meaning.
And today we're going to talk about picking a text that's a great fit for the students that you have in your classroom.
Right.
And so when we talk about text, we're talking about any kind of a text. It doesn't, open your mind wide. It doesn't have to just be a reader, although I know that a lot of people are always wondering, how do you select exactly the right reader? This could apply to any type of text, whether it's an audio or a literary text.
Mm-hmm. So the types of texts that I typically read in my classroom, we read 4 readers per year in general.
We do as well.
In level 4 or 5, I do add some additional readings. It's very reading heavy in level 4 or 5. So they also read some short stories. They read a lot of nonfiction. We do some poetry. So reading is a central part of my classroom.
I feel like it is of mine as well. We do, in level 1, our teachers do 3 readers per year. And then in level 2, 3, and 4, we do 4 readers per year. But we also balance that with lots of infographics and little articles and adapted articles. And we do some poetry, like you said. We try to read a lot of things because I feel like they just acquire and songs. We talked about that in episode 1. It's crazy how a student will write something and you just know immediately that word or that structure came from a song that you learned in the classroom because they've just acquired that from that music. So
yeah, I love to see that happen too. It's awesome. I definitely reading is an important part of my classroom as it is for you. One of the things that I hear and I actually observe a lot is I think a lot of people think that a student in a level 1 or 2 class can't read. They feel like they're not ready to read yet. And I just feel like my students are living proof that is absolutely not true. And I think that this is going to be a little controversial. So can I say something a little bit controversial?
Yes, please.
All right. So I have heard for many years, and I'm sure you've heard this too, people say to adjust the task, not the text. And I don't really agree with that. I really think you can sometimes adjust the text. And I think it's okay to have a certain text that you would only use with a certain level.
I agree. And I will tell you why. When I was getting my master's degree, so at the school that I went to, it was kind of a small college, and the master's students took 500 level classes, but we were in with the 400 level seniors that were getting their bachelor's degrees, and they were reading these same novels that I was reading, but they couldn't read them. I would go before class, I'd be sitting in the hallway waiting for them to open the doors for the professor to get there. And these seniors in college would be in the hallway, and sometimes they would be crying because they knew that we were going to have a test over this text and they hadn't understood anything that they'd read. And so they would be asking me, what do you think is going to be on the test? And the first reader that I wrote it, and then I consulted with the professor of the class I was taking. It was about the Spanish Civil War, and he and I got to talking about it, and he said, these students come to me and they've never held a book in their hand, and then I'm giving them these books to read, and they don't they don't know how to read a book. Like they've only ever read pages of stuff and they've never read a book. So he's actually using Readers for Learners now in his 100, 200, and 300 level classes so that when they get to those 400 level classes, they've held a book because it's such a big gap to jump to go from reading, you know, basically no books. And so, I mean, I agree. There's a time to read authentic pieces. Absolutely. I think they're authentic pieces they need to be reading, but also we have to remember that we have a lot of kids that don't have super high reading skills. And so we have to scaffold a little bit for them, and having a book. Now there are good and bad examples of books for learners. I'm not going to argue that one bit, that there are good and bad examples of what that looks like, but there is a place for something that will help scaffold them into reading a full chapter book before they hold a full authentic piece.
Right. And, you know, sometimes I see, you know, teachers that are really, really dedicated to using all authentic resources. And I'm not dissing anybody if that's the way that you're teaching. I love authentic resources too, but I think it's important to remember, like, if you're putting, you're not going to put like a whole newspaper article in front of a level 1 student. And also, if you put something like super simple in front of a level 1 student, that's just because it's an authentic resource. You know, maybe they can understand more words if it's something super simple, but also what are they really getting out of that resource? So if it doesn't have a lot of text, they're not getting input. But if it's got a lot of text, but it's too high of a level, they're also not getting any input because they're not understanding it. So you have to find a text that is comprehensible for the level that the learner is at. And it needs to be a robust enough text so that they can spend some time with it and are actually able to interact with the language enough so that they're going to acquire some language structure.
Agree.
Yes.
And again, there definitely are better examples of those texts and, you know, and not as good examples of them as well. So you have to be careful. You have to audit what you're going to put in the hands. I would 100%, please don't ever pick up a text just looking at it online and saying, oh, this title sounds great. I'm going to buy 30 copies and read it with my students in my classroom. Like always read every book that you bring into your classroom and make sure that that book is a good example of what you want in your students' hands. You should read that book before you ever let your students read that book, because you want to make sure that that is communicating a message you want in your students' hands before you bring it into your classroom. But once you find the book that you're engaged in the story yourself and you feel passionate about the topic, then you can dig in and really be excited to teach this book with your students, or this, whether it's a long story or a short story. You can even dig a story out of a video online. Like you can find a little short clip on YouTube and you can make that into a story that you share with your students by writing a little clip chat. And so then you're giving your students the story to read from the clip chat, and you're talking about that story and you're reading that story. So there are lots and lots of ways to get a story into their hands. It doesn't have to be a long reader. But it can be a story that you've designed to help scaffold them into reading longer and longer things.
Yeah, I think that's so key what you said about finding something that you, the teacher, feels kind of passionate about. If the teacher's not interested in the story or the topic, it's going to be really hard for you to get students interested in it. I mean, you can only fake that for so long. So I would say the first key is find something that you as the teacher personally enjoy, and you're going to get something out of teaching it. Because if you're not into it, the kids sure are not going to be into it.
I mean, if you came in as a new teacher and there were 50 copies of a book on your bookshelf that you feel like you have to teach because that was what was there from 20 years ago, like don't feel like that's the book that you have to teach just because that was there from 20 years ago. There are so many things out there now. So be sure that you look at what's new
And honestly,
and what's out there to read
20 years ago, I'm not going to name names, but like there were a limited number of books out there that you could really read with lower level students. And we needed those books, those books served their purpose well at the time. But a lot of them were really, really cheesy and really, not the best stories. But we would make it fun because we would do a lot of readers theater and we would go like super melodramatic and we would actually laugh at the parts that we thought were cheesy and acknowledge that it's cheesy. So yeah, if you have something that you've inherited or maybe you bought it without reading and it's not quite everything you dreamed of, there are ways that you can spice it up and still have fun with it, even if you're not.
We had, I think it was like I hate to throw Santiana under the bus, but it was like La Momia Desaparece or something like that we had in the classroom when I moved in. And it was not the greatest.
Yeah, and I mean, bless their hearts.
But, we made like
bless their hearts. We needed that at the time.
They did what they could with what they had. Like, we needed it at the time, but it was
so it's like better and you do better. But so
it was so hard. I mean, the kids couldn't understand. There were so many footnotes. Like, you're reading along and like every fourth word you have to look to the bottom to read the footnote. And it wasn't super comprehensible. But I mean, we did the best that we could. We made these like, poster boards with all those storyboards.
And I find like when there are too many footnotes in a reading, I find that my students get lazy about even looking down at the footnote. Like, it's amazing. It's right at the bottom of the page, but I don't know if they don't notice it or just don't want to move their head to look at it. But that's not a thing that really helps them read. I think limited number of footnotes is definitely something that you want to look for.
Well, and I think that's a big key with some of those texts that I noticed with those kids in my master's classes, that when the students can't understand the reading, they become fully dependent on the teacher just telling them what they read. And that's not helping them acquire vocabulary, and that's not helping them develop reading skills and decoding skills when it all comes down to the class discussion, telling them, okay, that does build proficiency in discussion. It helps them build speaking proficiency and listening proficiency, but it's really not doing much to develop their reading proficiency when it's all about how the class dissects what the reading was about rather than really understanding the reading. And that's what the seniors were doing. They couldn't read the text. So they would ask me what was going to be on the test, and I would help them know kind of what to answer on the, this is basically the main idea, what I think might be, on the test. And I would help them kind of study and prep, and then we'd go in and we'd take the test, and then the teacher would discuss afterward, like what we had read. And that's how they kind of knew what was happening in the books to participate in the discussion. So to be able to really get something, our goal with reading is to help them build reading skills. And so if we really want them to build those reading skills, we got to target a text that's going to help them acquire vocabulary and acquire grammar structures. Like, they can acquire some high level grammar structures through reading if we target a text that they're really going to be able to understand.
Right. And that's the key, is you've got to get students to actually read, not just depend on the class discussion. And if it's a reading that's at their level, most students will read. I mean, if there's a book in front of them, it's kind of hard to not pay attention to an open book in front of you. But it's really easy, especially for teenagers, it's really easy for them to just shut down and tune it out if they feel like it's going to be out of their reach. So it really is important that I think if you have to err on the side of one, too difficult or too easy, I would always say err on the side of something that you might feel is a little too easy. You wanted to have some new vocabulary and expose them to some new language structures, but you don't want it to be all new. Otherwise, it just gets frustrating.
Right.
And just because the language is easy, as long as it is authentic language, and by authentic, just, something that a native speaker would say, yes, this is okay, this sounds good. Um, Even if it's simplified authentic language, as long as it's authentic language, they're going to be continually acquiring, even if it's an easy text.
And I think that when they feel successful, what I've noticed in my classroom is that when they feel successful with the text, so maybe I do err toward the side of an easier text. The discussions are so rich because they're so confident that they understand what's happening in the readers that we're reading, that they get gung ho into those. Like, they love being involved in the discussions because they know. Everybody knows. It's not just a select few that understand what's happening. Everybody really is engaged in the story, and so everybody wants to participate. And that for me is the goal of the language classroom, for them to be excited to use their language to participate in discussions with me. And we do kind of I call it Discussion Thursday. It doesn't always happen on Thursday, but typically our Thursdays are a little shorter. So we do our discussions almost always on Thursdays. And so on Discussion Thursday, they lead the discussion. I just sit and listen to them, and they ask all the questions, and they all take turns answering. And I just pick who's, the next to answer. I just love sitting back, and it's like this reward for, getting to spend the week with them and then hearing them lead their own discussion.
And it's satisfying for them to know that they can do that. We talk a lot about how it's important to be always giving your students input, but output does have a role. And I think one of the roles of output is for the teacher to be able to evaluate how the students are doing, but also for the students' personal satisfaction. I mean, that's kind of why you're in a class. You want to be able to speak.
Right.
So what would you say?
And, to have that rewarding
What would you
moment.
say are, hang on. What would you say are some of the things a teacher should be looking for? So maybe they've purchased several texts, they're evaluating what they'd like to have their students read, or maybe they're looking at some, little articles online that they might like to have their students read. So what should a teacher be thinking about in terms of, how do I know if this is going to be level appropriate for my students?
I would say that some of the things that I look for in a text that would be level appropriate for my students would be, if I'm reading through a chapter and I find maybe 5 or more times that would really be stoppers for my students. This is not a cognate that they could, if it's a cognate that they would understand as they're reading, it's no big deal. But, I would literally have to stop and, explain what this is, write this on the board more than 5 times in every single chapter. This is probably a little too hard, because, that's over a 10 chapter book. That's a lot of stopping and breaking the flow of reading. I don't, the chapters in a book made for a learner are pretty short. If I felt like they're like 3 pages long. So if I felt like twice every page of a book I was reading, I was having to go to the dictionary and look up a word, I don't think I would be enjoying that book very much. And so I try to put myself in the shoes of my students in that way. So that's kind of one thing I look at text wise. Also, culturally, content wise, I try to think, is this something that we have some kind of heavy reads. My book, Bananas, I wrote a book called Bananas. It's about the banana plantations in Central America. And so, if I'm going to read a heavier read about, banana plantations, then I kind of want to read something lighter next, keep an ebb and flow in the classroom, have happier stuff, followed by, we do like a scary story unit where we read Chocmule and we watch El Orfanato. And, I like to have stuff where they're, changing their moods as we go through the year. So it's not too much,
Yeah, I like to look for things that are going to have something cultural that we can learn about, even if it's just kind of off on a tangent a little bit. I like to something that's going to have several different cultural things that I can also teach about. And then also I like to think about, what kinds of discussions am I going to be able to have with my students? Am I going to be able to have a discussion
Yes.
that's achievable at the level the kids are at? And
Hmm.
are there like hooks that I can exploit, things that are going to get the students
Yes.
excited about it? And then I also just generally look at the level of the text too. Like, what are the sentences long with, more than one clause, or are they short and simple? Depending on the level, I'm looking for different things.
What kinds of transition words
Right.
are in there? I love like your book, Frida Kahlo. That one I could read it at level 2, but I read it at level 4 because I love the way that we can talk about
Hmm.
identity at level 4 is so different from the way that we can talk. So it's an easy enough read that I could do it much earlier, but the discussion is so
Right.
much richer when I save it for
Hmm.
a later level. So there's nothing wrong with having a
Hmm.
simpler read in a later
Yeah.
level.
I think
So
another thing to consider is just the straightforwardness of the plot. So like if you're in a lower level, it
yes.
should be a very simple linear plot. If you're in a higher level, you can do things that maybe have like flashbacks to the past or speculations about the future or
Yes.
time travel or whatever the case may be. I'm gonna save those types of books for a later level because I think at the beginning they just need it to be very concrete and very linear.
Yes. Yeah, because they're so focused, their language skills are
Hmm.
so new that all they can focus on is making meaning. They can't focus anything more than just
Right.
making meaning. They're very low on the
Yes.
Bloom's taxonomy in that low novice area. They can't yet, do
Right.
big things.
But I think, Carrie, what you said earlier, I think to me is the key is you've got to trust yourself as the teacher to be able to select a text that's appropriate for your students. I mean, I think most teachers can pick up a text and know where their students are going to trip up. I feel like I always have this little
Yes,
internal vocabulary list of like what my students know at any given moment.
absolutely.
And I kind of know like where they learn certain words too. It's like a weird little.
Absolutely. You know what unit we've taught. We know now if you're in a huge department where, you may get students that come to you in level 3 that have
Hmm.
had other teachers for level 1 and 2, you may not know exactly who's coming into your classroom. They may have had two different teachers at level 1 and 2, and you really don't. Yeah, I mean, you're just getting kids that you have no idea what their background is going to be coming to you at level 3. So that may not work for you. You may just have to kind of pick based on, I assume this is what is being taught in level 1 and 2. So but we would encourage you then go for the, easier text. Like always kind of err to the side of an easier text, especially if you feel like maybe they have not read
Hmm.
something before. Because when you feel like maybe they've not read something before, then you're going to want to err on the side of easier text, because the easier their first read is, the more successful they're going to feel going forward.
100%. Well, that just about does it for today. So we hope you've been enjoying our little series on robust reading. We're going to wrap it up next time with our third installment. So we hope you'll join us for that. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.